Story 1. When I was about 14 or 15, I'm 20 now, I was living with my grandparents, my mom, younger sister, and great-grandmother. I would stay up later than everyone else on weekends and holidays watching TV while sitting on the floor of the lounge room. From where I was sitting, I could see up the hallway. The first door in this hallway belonged to my great-grandmother. About once every month or so, she would walk out of her room, look at me, and chastise me for being up so late. This was usually around 11 p.m. A week after she died, I sat in the lounge room, in my usual spot, watching TV late at night, when someone walked out of her bedroom. Since I knew no one was sleeping in that room, I looked up and saw her staring at me from the hallway. She asked me, "Does your mother know you are up this late?" before shuffling off to the bathroom. When I finally got up the nerve to go to my bedroom, I had to walk past her room and the bathroom to get there. The tap had been turned on. She always forgot to turn it off. About a year later, my older sister moved into that room with her boyfriend, and aside from a few odd happenings, they had no serious encounters until one night they left their lava lamp turned on. They both awoke to a loud smash as the lava lamp hit the wall on the opposite side of the room. It had been yanked from the wall and thrown. We are certain of this because of the distance and the fact that the alarm clock and keys in front of the lamp had not moved at all. My older sister moved from this room within a year, and my younger sister moved into it. She placed posters on the wall and kept the room relatively clean. However, if I were to enter her room, with or without permission, once I left and closed the door, her posters would get torn from the walls and her ornaments thrown to the ground. Needless to say, I rarely entered that room afterward. 2 years ago, just after I moved out, my older sister moved back into the house, but in a different room, as my younger sister still occupied that one and placed her children in another room as well. A few months into living there, my nephew began telling tales of men who walk into his room and play with his toys. At first, my sister thought nothing of it until my nephew would no longer play with his toys as the bad men played with them. She and her children then moved into the granny flat behind the house and have had no problems since. However, my second eldest sister moved into this house around the time my other sister moved into the granny flat. This sister also stayed in a different room. She stayed in what used to be a sunroom, but had been converted to a large bedroom. She turned on her pedestal fan each night to cool herself down and woke night after night to find it turned off and moved to the other side of the room. She believed it was her husband and told him to stop. However, this continued. One night she awoke and found the fan turned off, and just as she rolled over to wake her husband and tell him off for turning off the fan, it began to slide across the floor. She stared at it and saw no one beside it. She checked to make sure her husband was in fact beside her in the bed, and of course he was. She turned on the lamp beside her and the sliding stopped. I know you only asked for one story, but I thought I would share just a few of the paranormal occurrences I have experienced. I apologize for the mass amount of text, but the things listed here barely even scratch the surface of the things experienced by myself and my sisters, not only in that house, but in others as well. Story 2. When the house we live in today was for sale, we went with our realtor for a tour. The 80-plus-year-old lady who lived there at the time was there. She stayed in the corner bedroom on a bed and read a book while we looked around. After we left, my wife and I thought it was strange that she hung out in that room and not the master bedroom, that the bed in the master didn't look like it had been slept in a while, and that the master bath had not been used in a long time. Once we bought the house, the neighbor told us that the old lady didn't like to spend any time in the master suite anymore because that's where her husband, Ray, had died. Fast forward a few years. My wife is out for the day, so it's just me, our 3-year-old, and our baby at the house. After putting the baby down for a nap, I asked the 3-year-old to hang out in the bedroom while I got a quick shower. He had gotten one of these toys a few days before, but had been having a lot of trouble figuring it out. I went in the shower and left him on the bed with that toy and a few others. When I was in the shower, I thought I heard him talking to someone. Maybe my wife had come home early, but when I got out, it was still just me and him. Now, though, he was sitting on the bed, proficiently working the gyro toy. I told my kid I was happy he figured it out, and he replied, "Oh, it's easy now that Grandpa Ray showed me how it works." Story 3. I studied abroad in Italy during my junior year of college and lived at this old castle. The students stayed in what is affectionately called the Croft. Every night we would hear noises like someone walking, but we would just assume it was the old wood creaking or somebody going to use the restroom. One weekend, the whole group, except me and two others, decided to go to Milan for the weekend. Well, one evening, as I lay in bed reading a book and waiting for my friend to get back from the library, I distinctly heard the sound of the croft door opening and closing. I then heard halting steps on the stairs. These were not subtle creaks, but obvious footsteps. So I assumed it was my friend or his girlfriend coming back, so of course thought nothing of it. Then the steps began to sound closer and closer to my door, but I heard no voices and an unexpected chill crawled down my spine. I felt nervous, so I yelled, "Is that you, Dave?" The steps stopped outside my door, but again no one spoke. I was starting to become terrified when I heard my friend and his girlfriend walking down the path outside, and I immediately stuck my head out my window and called out to them and asked who was in the croft. They replied that no one but me was in there. I did not even hesitate. I jumped out my window, and the moment I was out, I heard the door to my room slam open and heard what I can only describe as a whispered scream of rage. No one in the group ever believed me, but I asked the castle's cook about it, and she explained that there were ghosts in the croft. 3. One little girl who liked to play pranks, one weeping woman, and one malicious man with hate for the living. Story 4. Growing up, I used to spend the night at a house that was, in my opinion, haunted. My friend lived there with her family, and they all thought nothing of the sinks turning themselves on and off at night, sporadically. Not a drip, mind you, but a fucking full-on sink for 3 seconds and then nothing. It would wake me up every time and scare the shit out of me. Other haunted shit in this house. The TV turned itself on sometimes and changed channels by itself. One time we lay in the bed upstairs talking, and the TV turned on and started slowly flipping through different channels of static. My friend's bedroom was the bonus room, so she had the door to the attic in her ceiling. If we stayed up talking too late, we would hear warped wood start creaking back and forth across the door. So scary when you're all 14 years old. Worst thing. This was the thing that made me officially stop going over to her house. One time the whole family packed up and went to Sam's Club to go shopping, and as a bored 14-year-old, I came with them. The mom locked up the house. As usual, we shopped for 30-minute tops and came home. When her mom went inside, she tried flipping on the lights. Didn't work. She said, "I wonder if the power's out," and tried other lamps. Nothing. After a swift check of the house, it was discovered that all the light bulbs in the house had been moved to the 4 corners of the living room. I don't know why, but I remember crying when we discovered them. For some reason, it was deeply scary for me. Story 5. In early 2007, I was in a traveling singing group, and there were 8 of us on a team, and the team members were switched every year. We were invited to stay the evening at the house of a previous member named Drew. Drew wasn't home, so it was his mom, his sister, and his brother who hosted us. Now, we'd all known that Drew's dad died about 4 years earlier, but he died of a heart attack and not in the house. I generally try not to be superstitious, but I went into the house and immediately felt a little uncomfortable. I blamed it on the fact that Drew and I had never really seen eye to eye, or that I felt bad for his mom who had been widowed so young and left with 3 children. As sleeping space was limited, I got put down on a cot in the basement, along with another girl on my team. The basement wasn't a creepy basement by any means. It had been refinished and was pretty comfortable. My cot was only about a foot from the wall, and there was a small old digital clock between the wall and the cot. I fell asleep in my usual manner, facing the wall, back to the room. At 2:48 a.m., I'll never forget the clock since it was the only thing I could focus on. I woke up very suddenly. I was immediately frozen in bed. My heart was racing, my throat went tight, and I couldn't swallow. It was primal fear at its best. I couldn't roll over to check, but I swear, even now, that something was standing over me. Everything in my instinct told me not to turn around. It felt like my life depended on me staying right where I was. During this time of intense fear, I kept seeing images in my mind, flashes of gore, and plain-out horrible things. I could hear laughing in my ears, but not the voice of just one person laughing. It sounded like I was in a room with thousands of things laughing. I remember for the first time having suicide cross my mind during this overwhelming, fear-driven time. I should note that I am not and have never been suicidal. When the feeling went away, the last thing I remember hearing in my mind was, "Not this one." I looked at the clock again and only 9 minutes had passed. Longest fucking 9 minutes of my life. A few hours later when I got up, I decided I was going to get the hell out of there as quickly as I possibly could. I skipped a shower and breakfast and sat in the van waiting for the rest of my team. As I was waiting, Drew's brother came out and spoke with me. He said one sentence, "I'm sorry I couldn't help you this morning." As he said it, he had tears in his eyes. He honestly looked like he was going to be sick to me. The look of hopelessness in his eyes still haunts me. 2 weeks later, we got word that Drew's brother killed himself just before 3 a.m. Ever since the incident, I still have dreams of them laughing. Part of me wonders if I would have just tried talking to his brother. Maybe things would be different. I've never spoken about this to anyone but my husband. It brings back a chill to my spine and a sense of guilt. I don't know what to make of it or what the hell happened in that house. Part of me never wants to know. Story 6. My family moved across the Pacific when I was in high school, and we weren't able to go back to visit for years. One night I dreamed about my favorite grandmother from Mom's side. She came to visit me and take me to the night market. At the night market, we met her older brother, and the two of them apparently live together now, so she introduced her older brother. Her older brother was not able to escape communist China and died before she was able to go home and visit. Her entire family died during the war. Only she and her husband survived. We walked around the night market. She got me one of my favorite snacks, caramel-coated tomatoes on a stick, and we walked around some more. Then I noticed something wasn't right. The food carts were not the normal modern-day food carts. They were ancient-looking with bamboo roofs. People were holding candle lamps and shops were lit up by candle lamps too. Then I realized the patrons were a bit weird. I was sure one guy was holding his head, and the father with his daughter sitting on his neck looked as dead as his daughter. Everyone looked moderately calm, happy, content, but they were so not alive. I asked my grandmother if everyone here is dead, and she said, "Of course they're dead, why wouldn't they be?" For some reason I didn't question her at all, and we hung out for some more. I remember we hung out for a few more hours before she dropped me off, can't remember where. Then I woke up. 2 weeks later, my aunt called to ask my mom if my dad told her her mother died 2 weeks ago, the exact day I dreamed of her, and if we were going back to attend the funeral. My dad didn't call. He just didn't care enough to tell us my grandmother died. My mother decided we were not going back to see her because we had school, and it would be unthinkable to miss school over a funeral. This was the only grandmother who recognized the abuse my parents placed on us and tried to stop it. Mom yelled at her and told her to stop meddling since Mom was helping with her living expenses. She couldn't do too much to help us. Before we left the country, she spent 4 hours telling me how she escaped the communists in China when she was 18 with a child. I told her I'd see her again. We'll be back to visit. She sighed and said she'd never see me again. She was right. Story 7. A friend of mine, Brian, used to do investigations with a couple of other people. They were very skeptical and would never assume anything they couldn't explain was a ghost. They'd just say, "Welp, something is going on here we can't explain," and leave it at that. They very seldom got a case that even ended in that. A couple of friends of Brian's kept bugging him to check out their apartment because they had made several contacts on a Ouija board and kept having weird things happen around the place, doors shutting randomly, stuff falling off counters. Of course, Brian's first reaction was, "A Ouija board? You've got to be fucking kidding me." However, his friend was insistent, and finally, he went to check it out. Brian had the guys use the Ouija board and they contacted several different spirits or whatever you want to call them. One of them spoke Spanish, which intrigued Brian because none of the guys spoke Spanish. The building the apartment was in used to be a hotel, and across from the apartment was a close-off hallway where all the rooms used to be. Brian, still skeptical but curious, took the Ouija board and some equipment into the hallway. Supposedly, he had several long, confusing conversations with several different entities. All of the entities expressed fear of one called CZ, and when Brian asked why, they'd be very cryptic about it. Eventually, one of the entities told Brian to search room 8. When he asked what he would find, it answered CZ. So Brian goes to room 8, breaks down the door, and finds a whole bunch of scribbling on the wall. The only legible markings are "Making Howlers" and "Chuck Zollner." Through a mix of Ouija conversations and inquiries at the Historical Society, Brian discovered that Chuck had killed someone in the hotel in the late 1800s. Chuck died in another state but supposedly hid the murder weapon in the hotel. As for the "Making Howlers" thing, When he mentioned it to the entities, he only got fearful responses and no answers. Another entity he contacted, Beth, claimed to be 19 years old and thought it was still the late 1800s, early 1900s. After some research, Brain discovered a girl named Elizabeth had been run over by a stagecoach in front of the hotel. On Brian's last visit to the hotel, he could only get a hold of one entity, one he'd never had contact with, and it kept saying, "I'm trying to kill you, etc., etc." Then a really strong, foul odor entered the room. The candle he had with him started burning sideways, and Brian decided it was best to leave. A couple of weeks later, Brian was talking to a supposed psychic, and out of nowhere she said, "You've been getting into things lately, haven't you? You need to clean that stuff off you." She told him some spirit named Elizabeth had attached itself to him. We tried to gain access to the hotel a couple of years ago, but Brian's friends moved out, meaning we couldn't get in the building, and the new owner didn't want us poking around. I wish I could have checked that place out, just to see what it was all about. Story 8. I know people don't believe in spirits. I never did until I lived in this one house. It was a newer home too, so it was odd to me. Perhaps it was just energy left over from a time long ago, I don't know. But my entire family saw stuff. It first started with noises. The first summer there, my sister and I were left alone all day while my parents worked. We were 15 and 10 at the time, and one day I heard coughing in my parents' room. My sister and I thought it was our father. We thought maybe he was homesick. So all day we kept hearing coughing, and finally, after about 5 hours, I decided to peek in and ask Dad if he needed medicine. There was no one in the room. We went in to check the master bathroom, and nothing, no one was there. Then a few days later, we heard the back shower open. It was one of those rolling kinds that made quite a bit of noise. We heard it open and close, and we sat there waiting for my mom or Dad to come out of the room. Again, nothing, they were not home. That summer my cousins visited, and they too heard the coughing and showering. We lived there for 5 years, and things got worse and worse over time. Tapping on the walls. My sister and her best friend were having a sleepover, and her friend saw someone walk out of my room. She said hi to me, but it wasn't me. My cousin saw someone walk out of the bathroom into my sister's room. She thought it was me, but I was out front at the time. My aunt stayed over on New Year's Eve once. She bitched me and my sister out for walking all over her airbed and waking her up. We did not do that. My mother was walking down the hallway in the early morning. She thought my dad was behind her and asked if he wanted a fuller half pot of coffee. When she got out of the hallway, she turned to see a man in a plaid shirt, who then ran past her. My sister's friend stopped coming over because she was in my sister's room, and the Susan B. Anthony coin my grandpa had given her flew off the shelf and hit the wall, leaving a dent in the wall. My sister was walking out the door at the time and thought of her friend who threw it. She had been on the top bunk sitting down. Her friend got up and called her mom to leave right away and never came back over. My best friend stayed over once for a week, and she stayed in my room with her evil cat that hated me. I slept on the bottom bunk of my sister's bed. My friend asked why I kept coming into the room to bug the cat, why I keep knocking on the walls, and why I would lay on the bed only to get up and leave. I did none of this. That cat hated me and would attack me. She said the cat would flip out and hiss and meow like I was in the room. Then one time I got up to go pee in the middle of the night in our bathroom the way the mirror was. If you looked over your right shoulder while on the toilet, you could see into the kitchen. I always did this when I left the door open. It was like 3 a.m., so the door was left open, and I looked in the mirror. I saw a man standing in the kitchen by the fridge. At first I thought it was my dad. Then he turned around like he knew I was looking, and there were no eyes, just dark patches, and he opened his mouth perhaps to say something, I don't know. I stopped mid-pee and ran back into my room, all the while keeping an eye on the guy. I never went pee at night again. Lol. I was so happy when we moved. I have no clue what all that was, but so many people witnessed and saw things that it wasn't just my imagination. Story 9. I was about 21 or 22, 4 or 5 years ago at the time, and I was kind of on again, off again with one girl. It was the day before Halloween, and it was unusually warm that evening, so I decided I would drive for like an hour and go to the beach in NJ, which is also a state park. It closes at night, but you can just walk around the fence and go there. Anyway, it was probably around 11 at night or so when we went there, and we walked for about 20 minutes up the beach and went and laid in the dunes and watched the stars while talking. We were talking and just shooting the shit in general while laying down and looking up, and I saw what looked like a bright star kind of zigging and zagging around. It went around randomly, changed speeds, direction, and all of that. I ignored it for about 5 minutes until the girl I was with said, "Do you see that as well?" Both of us kind of got the creeps, but continued watching it for another 10 minutes or so. It was getting a little more aggressive in its movements, jerkier or whatever. We crept and decided to head back. As soon as we went over the dune area back to the shoreline, the sky lit up, and what looked like a fireball fell into the ocean. It was very bright and scary. Both of us held hands closely and tried to calm each other down as we walked very fast back to the car. While we were walking, there was a bright light behind us all of a sudden, and it was getting closer and closer. Neither of us could turn around since we were both so scared. We stood there for a moment, both in absolute fear, and then all of a sudden, a cop appeared behind us and said, "Hey, what are you doing here? Get the hell out of here." I had tears in my eyes and told the cop I thought he was an alien, lol. Kind of embarrassing, but at least it lightened the mood. Strangely enough though, when we went back to the car, it appeared that we were on the beach for hours and hours, and I seriously know for a fact we were only on the beach for maybe an hour and a half at most. I see her sometimes still, and occasionally we will talk about it, but both of us have no idea what happened. Neither of us drank or did any drugs that night either. Story 10, Dominican Republic. About 4 years ago, I took a night trip with some friends out in the mountains. We were staying at a friend's cabin and left at about 10 a.m. for a secluded valley called Valle Nuevo. In this valley, 4 pyramids mark the center of Hispaniola Island. A good portion of the trip took place on a very, very dark road through the mountains. On this road, you can go for miles without seeing a house, or even telephone poles or electric lines. At about midnight, we were driving through one of the empty parts of the road with no civilization for miles, and we saw a man dragging another man by his arms. The man being dragged showed absolutely no sign of consciousness, being dragged on the dirt road like a sack of potatoes or something. When we were approaching, my friend Artie, the driver, slowed down and said, "I think we should help them." As he said this, our lights shined on the 2 men, and the conscious one turned around and gave us the most terrifying look I have ever seen on a man's face. His eyes were saying, "Do not stop if you know what is good for you." After convincing our driver friend that this man did not want our help, we continued down the foggy dirt road into the night. By about 2 a.m., we were a good 25 kilometers away from any civilization, driving along a delicate and dangerous cliffside road. All of the stars in the night sky visible when the road started filling up with fog. The fog caused us to almost drive our truck off a cliff, leaving our front right tire hanging off a 30-meter ledge. We understood this as a message from whatever energy had been following us that night, to stop, turn around, and go back home. After some amazing maneuvering, we managed to get the truck back on the road and decided to continue onward to our destination. In other words, challenge accepted. The fog got thicker, the road got smaller, the cliffs got steeper, and we moved forward. At one point, the fog got so thick that we could not keep moving, and a light appeared over the trees. It could easily be passed off as a star, but the fog did not allow a single star to creep into our vision. The light moved from our right side and floated over our front for about 5 seconds, then disappeared, as if being covered by the fog. As this happened, the fog in front of us started to clear, and within the next 5 minutes we had reached our destination. The amazing thing is the fact that we found the pyramids. It was pitch black out. There were no lights anywhere near this place, and none of us had been there before. A few months later we went back. Here is that picture.